the CFO and the CEO should never live in the same household, because it was my job to spend it and her job to save it. And so we were clashing constantly. It was a really tough time for us.
One of the things that Nix does really well is strategic planning.
And they all brought pieces of their strategic planning to us. We adopted the things we liked, we read books on it, and we just sort of adopted all the things that we liked, but we've packaged it up until where now we have a structure that we follow.
Welcome back to the ProFab Alliance podcast. This is episode 6 as we continue our conversation with Matthew Nix, the co-founder of ProFab Alliance and the president of Nix Companies, a 100-year-old company that grew 100 times in 20 years. We've talked a lot about the journey of laying out the foundation, how you got the right team members in place, how you laid out your vision, and now also how you've been operationalizing your values. But I think one of the things that listeners can learn from is some of the stumbles and hurdles that Nix has overcome in really the last 10 years or so. Can you talk a little bit about what are just some off the top of your head that some stumbles you may have had?
Yeah, typically, when you think about stumbles, they tend to fall into either a financial or operational bucket, perhaps customer service type stuff as well. But I'll talk about the financial part first. There's an old saying in business that cash is king. And, I had many mentors tell me that. I heard it over and over. I could conceptualize that. Of course, you got to have cash, right? But until you live through that, you don't really know. My grandpa likes to always say that, somebody can tell you their thumb hurts and you can really say, oh yeah, and until you smack your thumb and then you can really relate, damn, that does hurt. So it's kind of like that, and we went through that. There was a time, and during this time, so let's go back to about 2015. Yeah, so I joined the business in 2004. In 2010, hired the first team member outside the family. It was four, mom and pop, 4 family members. My dad, my grandpa, myself, my aunt for a while, and then my brother and my sister. But in 2010, hired the first team member outside the family. I believe in 2012 or 13, I took over as president of the company. About the time we were really starting to take off and grow. That 2013 year was when we doubled the business that year. And so it had been up and up and up and up and up. And, we talked about in a prior episode, that first big job we got that doubled our business, the customer paid really well. I was able to negotiate some down payment money and really there was good cash flow. So, we were growing like a rocket ship and cash flow was good. So I thought, hey, this is all fine. Fast forward to 2015, we made our first acquisition. In hindsight, we're probably undercapitalized on the acquisition, meaning we probably didn't have, enough cash available to manage some of the short-term cash flow impacts of the acquisitions that we now understand. They had a lot of inventory that we weren't properly capitalized for the inventory. And then compound that with, we were really heavily in automotive and oil during that time period. Both of those markets really had a downturn that year. And so business pulled back. We were undercapitalized on an acquisition and cash flow got really, really tight. There was a time I'll remember, and during this time, my wife Lindsay was doing our head of accounting role, sort of our controller type role, controller office manager. We had been growing, and I joke all the time that the CFO and the CEO should never live in the same household, because it was my job to spend it and her job to save it. And so we were clashing constantly. It was a really tough time for us, and I'm very proud of the fact that we got through that, and professionally and in our marriage. But I remember one particular time where I would come home and I just want a big job. I'm so excited about this job. And she's like, great, how are we going to make payroll next week? It was really that bad. And that's a very, very stressful thing to live through. You never forget that. One particular story that I'll tell about that it's kind of personal, but I think it's important for the audience to hear that it got bad enough one time where I was putting my oldest son to bed at the time. He was probably about 2 years old. I was getting ready to put him in his crib, and he just started talking. I don't know, he may have been 2.5, something like that. But he said, "What's wrong, Daddy?" He could see it in my eyes how stressed Man, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat on the floor and cried that night, and I thought, what in the hell have I done? I took a perfectly good family business and just about driven it in the ground because we just were having short-term cash flow problems. And you can be a healthy organization but be cash poor, and so that's something that we've really learned the hard way to manage that, and brought me to my knees and prayed, and we finally got through it. But there were times where you're waiting on the payment from the customer so that you can make the next payroll, and there was one time where this was after I'd taken over the company. I went to my dad. Well, again, we didn't have a line of credit at the time. I mean, today we have $1 million+ line of credit. Fortunately, nothing drawn on it. It's there as a safety net if we need it, because we've been much more diligent about the way we manage our cash and more conservative about that. But we didn't have a line of credit. We should have. We should have had that there for these circumstances. If it's used responsibly, it's a good thing to have. And I went to my dad and I said, hey, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make payroll next week. And and I thought he was just going to light into me. And he said, well, how much are you going to need? And I told him, and fortunately we got a big check from a customer that came in at just the right time, and I never had to borrow that money from my dad. But I was days away from needing to borrow money to make the next payroll, and then that once we turned the corner, we said, all right, we don't want to go back there again. And we've had challenges since then, but we've managed the business much more diligently from a cash perspective ever since then. So cash is king. Hopefully that little story can help connect with somebody. Again, until you live through it, you don't know, but you got to hear those stories, because if you just look at the big picture and you say, oh, this company's just grown like a rocket ship. I mean, we just about didn't make it. And it's like poker. When you're out of cards, you're out of cards. I mean, it's done, game over. So you can get down to a few left, but you can't run out.
I will say, me as a business owner, our company, Captivate Content, has seen in the last 3 or 4 years, we're a young company, and it's been it's been steady growth and it's been easy growth. But that's what I say, it's been easy. And I tell my wife every day, I go, just wait, one of these days it's gonna. For me, it's just I just know it's gonna happen. It's not me being negative. I'm a very positive person, actually. It's more of the you're preparing for the worst and hoping for the best type of thing. So the one thing that I have learned from you is like the cash is king, and I'm keeping that at the top of my mind as I run my own business. So that was a big, obviously stressful time in the Nix journey, right? And I would say that was around that time that you guys were doing like aimless growing. You guys were just growing for growing's sake. You didn't really have intentional scaling.
Yeah, we didn't have a plan.
Exactly. I think now we can kind of talk into that. Instead of aimless growth, what about intentional scaling?
Yeah, so the difference is, if you're just growing for growth's sake, or it's okay to be opportunistic, but you need some boundaries around that. So, now we have a strategic plan. We know where we want to go, and we know why we want to go there. We can still be opportunistic, but if the opportunity falls, it needs to be within those guardrails. We've said, this is where we want to go. It can't be way over there. And so, we're very diligent about that. People on the outside looking in probably think that, we're just doing everything. But what they don't know is we say no to 90+% of opportunities. We only say yes to maybe 10%. It's probably significantly less than that. Just as it pertains to acquisitions, I look at least 100 acquisitions on paper. I go visit probably 10 of those in person, and then we maybe buy one. And that's a conservative funnel. It could even be more at the top of the funnel. So. But that could be anything. That could be, helping Casey start Captivated Content. That was a little bit outside of our lane, but there was a reason behind that. Branding and our social media presence and video content creation has been a powerful tool for us. And so to partner with you, help you fulfill your dream, but also have a sister company that can do all this for us, to put this podcast together, for example. There was strategy behind that. There was a reason behind that. The average person goes on our website and says, why does this Fab Shop own part of a marketing company? But we knew that was within our guardrails, right? And we're not going to go out tomorrow and buy an insurance company or a car dealership or something. It doesn't make sense. And so aimless growth is just, growth for growth's sakes. And we step outside our lane every now and then, but now we know, and we have some common language, and we have an advisory board that helps us with those things, and we can say, hey, you know what? We probably stepped outside of our lane just a little bit too far here. Let's course correct. And so, it doesn't mean you get it perfect all the time, but it gives you some guardrails to run by.
And part of that, you kind of alluded to it without ever saying it, but one of the things that Nix does really well for a fabrication company, I think, but for really any company, is strategic planning. And if you're going away from aimless growth and you're going to be more intentional about your growth, then you have to plan, right?
Yep.
Can you just hit a little bit on it? Because I do think that strategic planning could be a whole nother episode, maybe not even just with you, but with Adam Schmidt, the other co-founder of ProFab Alliance, would really help with on the strategic planning. But why did you guys get into strategic planning?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if, how that came about. I mean, I think it was, I don't even know if we knew what it was called at the time, but, I had assembled the core team, which is now our executive team. And, we were trying to lay out where do we want to get to. And, that's when we wrote our first vision statement. And I think we had some 3 to 5 year goals that we laid out. And I think, actually, I know what it was. I read the book Good to Great, and I'll probably cite quite a few books throughout this podcast that are, were very powerful for me. That's at the top of the list. So if you haven't read Good to Great, you got to check that out by Jim Collins, and he's got a whole series. I've read the whole series now, but in Good to Great, BHAGs, Big Hairy Audacious Goals, was one of the things he talked about, and so we instituted our Big Hairy Audacious Goals, and we still have those to this day. And again, strategic planning is all about being thoughtful about where we want to go and how we want to get there. There's a few different ways you can go about it, but we won't get into that here. I think that would be a great episode for Adam to really dive into. That's one of the things ProFab does for our clients is Adam Schmidt has a whole format that he leads people through a very unique strategic planning process. So again, that's one of our offerings, and I think he could dive deeper into that. It's been an iteration for us. I mean, we're now down to where we make small tweaks to it every year, but it was a series of iterations, and our planning process came from our advisory board members. We've got 5 outstanding C-level folks that are on our advisory board, all work in other companies or are retired. And they all brought pieces of their strategic planning to us. We adopted the things we liked, we read books on it, and we just sort of adopted all the things that we liked. But we've packaged it up until where now we have a structure that we follow. And so when we go in and acquire a company, we bring that process to them and try to help. Let's say, all right, and I don't think we've acquired a company yet that had a strategic plan, which shocks me. If you don't know where you're, I think Yogi Berra said that if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. And so, it's just really important to know where you want to go.
That's very true. And, since this episode's a lot about like we started off with that big hurdle that really set you guys back a little bit and learning from that. And obviously, again, we're talking about now strategic planning and scaling, with like the end in mind kind of. One of the things I think people don't realize, and I think companies that are really on the precipice of taking to the next level is the fact that not only did you have your own executive team that you guys developed like this, that's a no-brainer, right? Even if you don't call it an executive team, having people on your team that you trust, that you guys are all working for the same goal, that's awesome. I think a lot of people kind of understand that. But what they don't understand, and what I didn't understand until I saw with my own eyes, is that you had some of the best leaders around the area, sometimes even in the country, come on your advisory board and be able to give you advice as you're starting to do this planning. Can you just talk just to give a little bit of insight on what made you decide to put an advisory board in place, and how that has helped you strategically plan and scale correctly?
Yeah. Well, I think I've just always been the kind of person that really wants to collaborate and wants to. I also challenge too in my 360 evaluation. That's one of the feedback I get is sometimes I'm too challenging and maybe I squelch the good dialogue in the room. But that can be perceived as I don't like debate and don't like input, and I really do like it. I actually thrive on that. So I've just always been a person that loves input and loves just dialogue and sharing and so forth. So I think was predisposed to that. But then also the real motivator for me to do it was mom and dad sold my brother and I the business on contract, which is a pretty typical family succession model, meaning they were the bank and we pay them out over time. There's tax advantages for them. There's obviously advantages for Adam and I that we don't have to go to the bank and get a big loan and so forth. So my parents were the creditors, so to speak, right? And I felt a sense of obligation to them that if we were really going to grow this thing and take on some risk, that I ought to bring in some outside counsel. They didn't tell me to do it. I just thought it was a smart thing to do. Like, I do not want to be, we have 2 other siblings that aren't in the business. Not to mention mom and dad worked their whole life to build the wealth that they've created through the business. Even though it was small, it was a good business. And that was, a lot of their wealth was tied up in the business, which is common for small business owners. So I thought, I don't want to be the one that crashes and burns this thing and, they lose everything they've worked for. So that was a motivator. Then also made a decision early on to have our executive team, the inner circle, become part owner in the company, which is a very unique thing for 5th generation family business. And my dad actually was very supportive of that when I told him I wanted to do that. And it was a pretty fundamental idea for me. I thought, I want these other four guys to go to bed every night and to get up every morning worrying about how we're going to make this thing work. I mean, it's as simple as that. I wanted them to have real skin in the game. And I wanted them to have all the reward of the upside of that, because it's just better together. It's more fun together, and you get to share in that success together. So that was the driver behind that. Therefore, I felt we needed to have some checks and balances and governance for their sake as minority shareholders. You don't want to be a minority shareholder of a company that the principal owner can just do whatever they want, and it's their own personal piggy bank and so forth. And so I thought, because of the mom and dad creditor situation, because of the minority shareholder situation, having an outside board would provide some sounding board and some governance to govern the company. And an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And we didn't have any problems at the time. We didn't need to do that. But I think because we did that, we don't have problems today, many, many years later. So yeah, that was the inspiration behind our advisory board. And I would, huge advocate of, whether it's a fiduciary board of directors or an advisory board, huge proponent of that. I could go on for hours and talk about the value that they've brought. We pay them, of course. They don't do it for the money, but we pay them so that we're respectful of their time. And it lets them know that, hey, we're serious about this. We're serious about this, and we expect you to take it seriously. So, yeah.
I think for future reference, I think that's an episode on its own. Even people, not just fabrication companies, to hear why, or just to go in more depth on like how an advisory board helps you guys.
I'd love to do an episode on that. I got to sit on a family business panel with some other folks, and we got to talk about setting up an advisory board. So yeah, that'd be a cool episode to do.
That'd be cool. So we started talking about financial challenges at the beginning of this episode, but you mentioned there were some other challenges. So what are some of the other challenges that you guys faced more recently, or even over the course of the growth of the company?
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty, I think, typical challenges when you're in high growth mode. We talked about the financial ones, operational challenges, and then, sort of personnel or HR challenges. So we'll talk about operations next. And that's a great segue out of the board discussion, because the board really helped so much and challenged me on this. So we were starting to have, quality was slipping. We were having more quality issues than we had. We were having more missed delivery dates than we had ever had. And things just felt out of control, I mean, not insanely out of control. I don't mean that, but you can just tell when it's like, okay, we're getting a little loose here. Things are getting sloppy. And I was really struggling with it. So I was just racking my brain, and it occurred to me that we had crossed that threshold where I could no longer manage by walking around. I didn't know every project that was going on in the organization. I mean, that's a lot of owners never get past that point. Like, the idea, it's so fundamental, but I don't think I can overstate that. The idea that you don't know every project that's going on in your company is a terrifying chasm to cross, and so I let's just say you own a construction company and I see you out in public and you ask me about a project we're doing and I don't know about it, and that's where I am today, and I just have to respectfully say, sorry, thank you for the business, I'm not aware of that, but I'm going to check into that tomorrow or whatever. I mean, we've got a lot of great people out there doing those things, and we do 3,000 jobs a year. I can't possibly know about every job that's going on, and so that's the point I'm getting to. You can't manage by walking around because there's too many people, too much going on. So I was talking to one of our board members over dinner, and I was really stressed about it. He said, "Well, what are your touch points?" I said, "Touch points? What's that? I don't even know what you're talking about." And in corporate America, everybody knows the jargon and all that stuff. And he said, touch points, you got to sit down and decide, because you can't talk to everybody. You can't know everything. You have to decide what are the things that you have to know and what are the things that you're going to touch, if you will, and check into. That was huge for me and for our organization. And I've now instituted that to all of my leaders and so forth. But because what happens is if you try to touch everything, you end up touching nothing. It's sort of like the thing about information. It's like too much information is as bad as too little information. And so I sat down and I mapped out what do I need to know every day, every week, and every month. And then I mapped that out. And we have a dashboard now that we've created. Again, that's something that ProFab, that's one of our products or toolkits that we're bringing to clients now. Is we've created a dashboard, and so we have 8 different locations. By 10 o'clock every single morning, they have 5 boxes that they turn red, yellow, green. And it's as simple as that. It's actually just red and green now. But so within 5 minutes, I can look across every location and look at those 5 things that I've decided these are the 5 things I want to know. Like, for example, do we have all the staff today that we were supposed to have to cover the shift? Unplanned absences. Is all of our equipment up and running today? Do we have the materials that we need today? Do we have the prints and information is really big in our business. Those are things that I want to know across, and I can look at that. And if you're running a location that's all green, I don't need to talk to you today. Why bother? I'm going to go over here where, we need support. And now I've handed that off to, some of the people on our executive team that really handle more of that now. Whereas I used to look at that daily. Now I only look at it weekly. I have a weekly dashboard I look at. And I have different touch points I make, to check, is the data matching what I'm seeing in real life? I don't have to try to walk around and see 150 people now. I can sample, and I can talk to you, and I can talk to that person, and I can say, hey, is that matching the data that we have? So you do that, and all of a sudden you kind of tighten it up, because you wonder how people can manage a massive company with thousands of people or multiple locations. That's how they do it with touch points. You have to decide what things really matter and what am I going to pay attention to, and then you can't worry about all the noise.
When you talk about touch points, how important is it to reiterate to the people that are maybe filling it, like you're talking about your red and green dashboard, and someone's filling that out, right? You said like if one location has all green, you might have someone say like, well, why don't they just put all green? They don't want to talk to the boss all day. How important is it open communication to say, this isn't a grade on your location. This is literally to see if you guys need help.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is numbers don't lie. So you can lie about your red and green for a little while, but it's going to catch up. I mean, it'd be pretty simple. If you just put everything green, Casey, and you lost money this month, I'd be like, what the hell? How are you green and you lost money, right? Or how are you green but 3 people quit, right? It might not be financial, but we have a lot of other KPIs that we track. Those might be the things we track weekly, monthly, quarterly. But again, for example, we instituted morale weekly. It's very, very simple. Every ops manager every week checks red, yellow, green on the morale. Okay, sure, he could say, I don't want to hear from Matthew, I'm going to check the morale green. Okay, well, if you check morale green every week, but your turnover is high, something's off here, right? So, and then I think then it goes the other way. If every time somebody marks something red, if I light them up, smack them, they're not going to mark it red. So I have to be very careful about that. Our other leadership team has to be very careful about that. You have to ask good questions, and not come down too hard on people when things are red. Why isn't that machine up and running? That kind of thing.
Are there any other struggles now? Obviously, that was operational. You mentioned like HR, which kind of ties right into operational. Can you talk about some of the struggles from an HR standpoint?
Yeah, again, just, getting bigger and not being able to have a first-hand relationship with everybody. So there's some things that I've instituted to be able to do that. One, I recognize that I have to really invest in my relationship with the key leadership and the management. I can't possibly have a strong relationship with 150 people. I try to know them all, know their names once they've been here with us a while. I try to know about their family and things, and which I genuinely do want to know. But I've come to recognize I can't have a deep relationship with them. So I have to really invest in the relationship of the leaders, and try to pour into them so that hopefully that happens. So that's one big adjustment I had to make, because I was just running myself ragged trying to keep track of all of it. And I just finally had to say, you can't. Again, my advisory board and mentors helped me with that. And so then I instituted touch points around that too. So for example, one of my touch points is every month I have a listening session where I meet with one of our locations without anybody on the org chart between them and me. So depending on the circumstance, the foreman may or may not be there, but definitely not their operations manager, not the VP of operations who the ops manager reports to. It's just me and them. And I have a series of questions I ask them. I ask them simple things like what's going well, what could go better, what do you want to see more of, what do you want to see less of. I ask them about how their supervisor's doing, their leader. Pretty simple stuff. What's one thing, if we were going to spend some money in your part of the business, what's one thing you think that we need, And so I meet with those groups every single month, and then we take notes. All that gets compiled. Our HR manager has a committee. We call it our People for People committee, that we have someone from every location that's on that committee. They talk about, new HR policies and procedures, whether that's adjusting our PTO, or we're going to make changes to the health insurance plan, or just general policies and procedures. We have a committee that all that runs through. Again, that's another touch point that we've created. So just various touch points that we had to put in place to be able to kind of keep our arms wrapped around everything. And you can't micromanage every detail, but to be able to know what's going on. And we stumbled big time to get to where we're at, and it's still not perfect, but I mean, you just get egg all over your face from, missing delivery dates, and quality was poor, didn't know what was going on, turnovers starting to creep up a little bit, and we're getting that going back the right direction again. And, you can just sense when it's like, okay, everybody always says, oh, you don't grow too fast, and I think the too fast thing is a very it's a relative term. Like, what's too fast for us, might not be too fast for somebody else, or vice versa. So when it's too fast and when you need to either A, slow down, or B, we got to really get some structure and some touch points in place before we go again.
During this episode, we've talked about the challenges and the hurdles, especially coming from aimless growth to being more intentional on scalability. And I think that's a great segue into our next episode, to talk about what processes you guys put in place at Nix for intentional growth. Like from my experience, I know that you guys put on the 3 pillars of growth that help you. So for the next episode of the ProFab Alliance podcast, we're going to talk about intentional scalability with Nix.